Normandy, August 1944. The air still smells of smoke and oil. On a narrow French road sits the wreck of a German Tiger I, its turret torn open, its armor blackened, but still defiant in the sunlight. American soldiers gather around it. One mutters, "If we had these things, the war would be over in a week." His captain replies, "If we had to keep them running, it would never end." The Tiger was more than a tank. It was a legend. 60 tons of steel, an 88mm gun, and the aura of invincibility. When it first appeared in 1942, Allied crews whispered its name like a curse. Shells bounced off its armor, entire platoons claimed to be stopped by a single Tiger. Even propaganda turned it into myth, the perfect expression of German engineering, unstoppable and exact. But behind the legend lay a question history rarely pauses to ask. If the Americans captured these perfect machines, why didn't they use them? The answer wasn't pride. It wasn't ignorance. It was something far more practical and far more revealing. Germany built masterpieces. America built momentum. To understand how that momentum was forged, we have to look where wars are truly decided. In the numbers. War is arithmetic written in steel. Every tank, every shell, every gallon of fuel adds or subtracts from victory. The Tiger was magnificent, but it was built like a handmade watch in a world that demanded millions of identical wristwatches. Between 1942 and 1945, Germany produced barely 1,300 Tiger I tanks and a few hundred Tiger IIs, the total output of one American factory in a single season. Across the Atlantic, America had become an assembly line of war. The lights of Detroit burned day and night. Chrysler built engines where sedans once stood. Ford's massive Willow Run plant rolled out a B-24 bomber every 60 minutes. From 1941 onward, American industry operated with one rhythm: more. Inside the tank factories of Lima and Fisher Body, molten steel poured into molds the size of houses. Conveyor belts rattled with the sound of hundreds of welders striking sparks in unison. There was no artistry here, only repetition, precision, and relentless momentum. Every Sherman was identical to the one before it. The tracks, engines, and transmissions fit like pieces of a puzzle that stretched across an entire continent. If one plant went silent, another picked up its quota. If a tank was lost in France, its replacement was already crossing the Atlantic. It wasn't just production, it was choreography. Railcars carried components from Pittsburgh to Cleveland. Ships carried hulls to Britain. Trucks moved them to the front. A Tiger took months to build. An American tank could go from foundry to battlefield in less than 6 weeks. Germany built machines that inspired awe. America built machines that arrived on time. By 1944, the numbers themselves told the story. But here's a question. How many Shermans do you think one Tiger was really worth? For every Tiger Germany rolled out, the United States built 50 Shermans, 100 trucks, and 1,000 tons of ammunition. Its factories turned out more than 86,000 tanks, 300,000 aircraft, and 7 million vehicles before the war was over. 16 million Americans wore uniforms, millions more welded, riveted, and shipped for those who did. Tank transporters stretched from the English coast to the sands of Africa. Fuel convoys carried 100-octane gasoline to every front in the world. Even the British and Soviets, fighting on opposite ends of the continent, were sustained by the same network of ships and supply lines that originated in American ports. It was not just industry, it was global logistics powered by geography and scale. And unlike Germany's fragile production web, the American system could absorb loss. A factory bombed, another took its place. A ship sunk, convoys closed the gap. Every setback was answered by volume. This was the real war, the invisible one. The war of welding torches, shipping manifests, and assembly lines. The Tiger was the product of a nation obsessed with mastery. The Sherman was the product of a nation obsessed with completion. A single Tiger could dominate a hill or a village. 1,000 Shermans, supplied and repaired without pause, could dominate time itself. The Tiger was a masterpiece of design. The Sherman was a masterpiece of continuity. And to understand why that mattered, why a tank built for endurance could defeat a tank built for excellence, we have to open one up and look closer at what the Americans were really driving. The M4 Sherman never inspired fear the way the Tiger did. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't legendary. It was simply everywhere. From the deserts of Tunisia to the forests of the Ardennes, it became the machine that refused to stop. At first glance, that made no sense. Its armor was thinner, its guns smaller. In a one-on-one duel, a Tiger could destroy a Sherman before the American crew even saw the muzzle flash. And yet, wave after wave, the Shermans kept coming, day after day, road after road. So what made them unstoppable? The first answer was reliability. For the men who fought inside it, the Sherman's greatest weapon was trust. Every time the engine turned, it came to life. In Belgian mud or Italian dust, it simply ran. Crews knew that when the order came, the tank would move. A field team could replace an engine in hours. A broken suspension arm, 2 bolts and a spare part. German tanks needed technicians. American tanks needed tools and coffee. That wasn't luck. It was design. The Sherman was built for soldiers, not engineers, a machine meant to operate in chaos, not to be admired in a factory. If the Tiger often had to pause for inspection and maintenance before every long march, the Sherman needed only a quick check, a tank of fuel, a wiped gun sight, and it was ready to roll again. The second answer was coordination. The Sherman's real edge wasn't in steel, it was in communication. Every vehicle rolled out with a radio connected to infantry, artillery, and air support. When a platoon spotted a Tiger, they weren't alone. Within minutes, they could call for fire or summon a P-47 strike. At Aracourt in September 1944, outnumbered American tanks destroyed more than 80 German Panthers and Tigers, not through firepower, but through coordination. While German commanders relied on messengers and luck, the Sherman units fought like a single, synchronized organism. Each tank was more than a vehicle. It was a living node in a vast, responsive network of men and machines. The third answer was adaptability and human continuity. Every army loses machines. What matters is whether it can keep fighting after the loss. The Sherman was designed for replacement. Manuals were standardized, parts interchangeable. A new crew could climb into a fresh tank and feel immediately at home. Training took weeks, not months. Fuel, ammunition, and spare tracks were the same across the entire front. Even when a tank was lost, the crew often wasn't. They survived, learned, and returned to battle in another machine. A Tiger crew, by contrast, was an elite team bound to a fragile masterpiece. When the tank died, so did its experience. The Americans weren't just building tanks, they were building continuity. That advantage wasn't loud, but it accumulated with every repaired engine, every shared radio call, every crew that lived to fight again. And it would become even clearer when set against what the Tiger had to endure just to stay alive. The Tiger entered the war as a symbol of precision and pride, but under the weight of its own perfection, the cracks began to show. To see how those cracks formed and why they mattered, we follow a Tiger from the repair depot to the front line, where fuel, distance, and time decided its fate. When the Tiger rolled into battle in 1942, it was supposed to be Germany's answer to everything. It was the tank that could kill anything, survive anything, and turn a battlefield into its own private arena. For a while, it lived up to that promise. But perfection came with a price, and the bill arrived sooner than anyone expected. Each Tiger weighed nearly 60 tons, an armored fortress built for power, not practicality. Its Maybach HL-230 engine strained under the load, bridges collapsed beneath it, transport trains could carry only one at a time. Even when it moved, its narrow tracks chewed through gearboxes and suspension arms. In the mud of Russia, Tigers bogged down. In North Africa, they overheated. In France, they ran out of gas. Crews loved their tank, but feared its fragility. Every march demanded hours of preparation, tensioning tracks, inspecting cooling fans, checking fluids. A Tiger might terrify the enemy, yet it exhausted its own crew before the battle even began. Keeping one Tiger in action required an ecosystem that Germany simply didn't have. Its parts were handmade, its tools unique, its ammunition incompatible with any other gun. If a track snapped or a gearbox failed, the tank could sit for weeks awaiting a replacement that might never come. As Allied bombers tore apart Germany's railways and fuel depots, the Tiger's appetite became a liability. It consumed fuel like an aircraft, oil like a factory, and spare parts that no one could deliver. Many were abandoned not because they were destroyed, but because they couldn't move. Crews often spiked the gun and blew the hull, rather than let it fall into Allied hands. The most feared weapon of the Reich was, increasingly, dying of starvation. Even within the German army, frustration grew. Field reports begged for simpler tanks, machines they could build, ship, and repair in quantity. But by then, Hitler had made the Tiger a symbol of national pride, too sacred to question. The Tiger entered the war to dominate through fear, but as its numbers dwindled and its engines failed, that fear began to fade. And on the other side of the sky, new predators were circling: fighter bombers, tank destroyers, artillery batteries, each learning how to kill the beast without ever fighting it head-on. The Tiger's armor could shrug off almost anything fired from the ground. But in 1944, the battlefield stopped being two-dimensional. The sky became the new front line. From the moment Allied air forces gained control of Europe's skies, the Tiger's reign was numbered. The British Typhoon and the American P-47 Thunderbolt hunted armor with rockets and bombs. A tank that could stop a shell could not stop the sky. Crews began to fear the distant whine of aircraft more than the sight of another tank. A single rocket could flip 60 tons of German steel. Even if the blast missed, shrapnel shattered optics, tracks, and fuel lines, turning perfection into dead weight. By 1944, most Tigers didn't perish in duels. They died on roads, caught in columns, broken by airstrikes they never saw coming. The Allies didn't rely on air power alone. They built weapons for one purpose: to kill heavy armor. The British Firefly, armed with a 17-pounder, could pierce a Tiger's front plate. The American M10 Wolverine and M36 Jackson brought high-velocity fire to the field. Sherman units didn't duel, they outflanked. While one tank drew fire, two others maneuvered for the kill. Speed and coordination replaced brute strength. A Tiger might win a duel, but the Americans had stopped fighting duels. As the Allies pushed toward Germany, the Tiger's aura of invincibility faded. Roads once cleared at its approach were now lined with its wrecks. What began as a weapon of terror had become a relic of exhaustion. The Allies didn't need to capture the Tiger to defeat it. They had already built the system that rendered it obsolete. To understand why that system mattered more than any single weapon, we have to step back and see the war not as a series of battles, but as a triumph of logistics. Wars are not won by brilliance. They are won by movement, by the side that can keep fighting when everything else begins to break. No one understood that better than General Leslie McNair, the architect of America's ground doctrine. McNair believed that victory came from organization, not perfection. He refused to replace the Sherman with the new Pershing in large numbers, because he didn't want to disrupt the system that was already winning. "We already have the tools to win," he said, and he was right. To McNair, every Sherman was part of a living organism. Convoys, fuel trucks, repair crews, replacement lines, all synchronized to keep the army moving. If one link failed, another replaced it. That was his genius, turning industry into doctrine. By 1944, the United States wasn't fighting isolated battles. It was conducting an industrial symphony. Tanks, trucks, and aircraft shared the same DNA, standardized, interchangeable, and predictable. Fuel that powered a Jeep could power a Sherman. A wrench that fixed a tank in France could fix one in Italy. Germany, by contrast, fielded variety at the cost of efficiency. Every new tank meant new parts, new training, new problems. While the Allies built harmony, Germany built complexity, and complexity breaks under pressure. The Red Ball Express, a highway of convoys stretching from Normandy to the Rhine, delivered fuel faster than the enemy could burn it. While Tiger crews begged for gasoline, American drivers burned it by the ton and still had more coming. Logistics wasn't just machines, it was people, mechanics, planners, clerks, drivers, the invisible army that kept the visible one alive. For every man who fired a gun, 10 others made sure he could. Germany's soldiers fought with courage, but courage can't fill a fuel tank. The Tiger was a masterpiece trapped inside a dying system. The Sherman was an ordinary machine powered by a system that never died. When the war finally ended, the truth was carved into every rusting hull across Europe. Victory doesn't belong to the side that builds the strongest machine. It belongs to the side that can keep its machines moving. The Tiger embodied power. The Americans mastered endurance. And from that endurance, a new kind of warfare was born, one defined not by weapons, but by systems. When the guns fell silent, the Tiger remained, not as a weapon, but as a memory. Its wrecks lined the roads of Europe, monuments to a lost idea that perfection could win a war. In the years that followed, the Tiger lived again, in films, in books, and in games. It became the face of German engineering, the icon of armored warfare. Children built it from model kits. Filmmakers gave it the starring role. Even today, when people imagine World War II armor, they see the Tiger. But the armies that defeated it never needed to copy it. They already understood something deeper, that strength lies not in one extraordinary machine, but in the ordinary machines that never stop arriving. The Tiger was power made visible. The Sherman was power made sustainable. One impressed the world, the other changed it. Inside museums, a few Tigers still stand, silent, immovable, perfectly restored. Visitors stare at them in awe, imagining what it must have been like to face such a monster. Few notice the smaller tanks nearby, the Shermans, built by the thousands, that made the world those visitors now live in. The myth endures because myths are simple. The truth endures because someone kept the engines running. When the last Tiger's engine stopped, the war was already over, not because it was destroyed, but because the system that sustained it had collapsed. The Americans never used captured German tanks because they didn't need to. They had already built something far greater, a machine that didn't just fight, but kept fighting.